Yes, yes, I'm getting loads of yeses. Wonderful. Now, let me just share my screen with you. Let me just jump across to that. Just bear with me 1 second while we get this loaded up. All right. I can see there are so many of you on the call today, which is absolutely wonderful. Probably because it's been a while since we've done an Excel webinar. At least for me, it's been a couple of months. And I think we do have a couple more scheduled for this year. So please feel free to join us for those as well. So the title of the webinar today is Excel Tips and Tricks. And I'm really going to kind of center this around Excel functions as well, because there's always those functions in Excel which people tend to struggle with, and also functions that are very important, particularly in the industry that you work in. So we're going to look at those functions, and as we go through, I'm going to throw in productivity tips and also efficiency tips. So hopefully you'll pick up lots and lots of different things along the way. So we're going to kill many birds with one stone, shall we say. All right, let me just jump across to my next slide. I don't want to spend too long on this preamble because I do want to jump straight into the content because we have so much to cover today. But for those of you that haven't attended one of my webinars before, or even one of the sessions that I've run at the AAT conference, I'll just let you know a little bit about me. So my name's Deborah Ashby and I am an IT trainer. And I basically design, deliver, and facilitate Microsoft courses for various different clients. And I'm bringing you this webinar today on behalf of a company called Filtered. And if you've never heard of Filtered, I'll just briefly remind you, because this is very important, that Filtered are a company that provide online training courses, and as part of your AAT membership you do have access to the Excel and Advanced Excel courses. So if you didn't know about that, that's always useful to know. I've been training for quite a long time now, about 9 years or so actually training, but I've been working with Excel for about 22 years. So hopefully that qualifies me to be training you today. Now, that's enough about me. Let's move on to what we're going to be looking at over the next hour. Now, as I said, I am going to center this around some really important functions and throw in a lot of productivity tips as we go through. And we're going to jump straight in to lookup functions. So more importantly, things like VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. Now, I feel like I do these all the time. Whenever I run an Excel training session, there's always VLOOKUP thrown in there somewhere. And the reason is that it's probably one of the most vital functions for you to understand and know, particularly the kind of roles that you guys do. And it is something that people do tend to struggle with as well. And they are actually reasonably simple once you break them down and get your head around them. So I want to start out straight off the bat by jumping into looking at VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP so you fully understand that. We're going to start at the beginning, so if you don't have any experience with them at all, that's absolutely fine. And we're going to work our way up to something slightly more complex. We're then going to move on to the index and match commands, which are, again, two separate functions that you can use together to, again, do lookups, essentially. And they are a little bit more advanced. But again, very, very good to get your head around and understand. We're then going to move on to working with logical functions. So we're going to do some things like some if statements. And again, if you're not sure what I'm talking about here, don't worry, it will all become clear as we go through. And then finally, hopefully, if we have time, because I always tend to overestimate how much I can fit into these sessions, we're going to be taking a look at some what-if analysis tools. So we're going to do things like goal seek and also take a look at some scenarios as well. Again, two really useful utilities in Excel that you might find very, very useful. So that's kind of what's on the agenda for today. So let's start out with taking a look at lookup functions. Oh, actually, before I do, let me just mention with regards to questions. Now, you might have some questions as we go through. It is quite difficult for me to look at the questions and keep the session on track. So what I tend to do is say to you, if you do have a question as you're going through, just note it down, and then I'm going to leave 5 minutes at the end so we can run through some of those questions. So just make a note of it, and then we can put it into the chat at the end and take a look at your questions. So just so you know, I'm not going to be looking at questions as we go through. All right, so lookup functions. Now, Let's start by discussing exactly what are lookups and why are they useful. Well, essentially what lookups allow you to do is take one piece of information from one set of data and use that piece of information to look up information in a different set of data. Now, that's quite hard to get your head around until you see an example, but just very briefly, they are designed to work with data that is organized into columns. And as I said, it finds the value in one column and returns the corresponding value from another column. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, I have a little example here before we jump into a live demonstration. So this is just a very brief example, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So what I have here is two little tables, and in the top table we just have I think it's the top 10 best-selling rock and heavy metal albums of 2017. And you can see we have the band name, the album, the sales figures, and then we have a record label column which is currently blank. And then underneath that we have another table. Now this table could be on a completely different worksheet. It's on the same one in this example, where we have the album name and the record label. So what I can do is I can use VLOOKUP to pull back the record label into the first, or into that blank column in that first table. And really, when you're using VLOOKUPs, what you need to be looking for is the common information between the two tables. So in this case, that would be the album name. So I would use the album name essentially in my VLOOKUP to pull back the record label information. Okay, so that's kind of what VLOOKUP does. So let's get into an example and show you exactly how this works. So I'm going to come out of PowerPoint. I'm going to jump across into Excel. Now, hopefully you can all see that. Let me just zoom in a little bit to make it a bit bigger. All right, so what we have here, let's just look at our data. Now, I know this probably isn't relevant to your industry whatsoever. It really doesn't matter the data that I'm using because, again, you can use this in any data. It's the same. It works the same no matter what kind of data that you're using. Now, what we have here is a list of products. So this might be sales information for a furniture company. So we have in our first column, we have product names. We have a column for the color, we have a column for the price of those products, how many are in stock, how many have been sold, and the revenue generated. And what I'm looking for is I need to populate the department and also the category that these products belong to. Now, I actually have that information on a separate worksheet in a different table, and it's in this tab down here called Product Catalog. And again, let me just zoom in a little bit because everything's a little bit small. And you can see there what we have is we have the product, but then we have the department and the category information. So this is the information I'm looking to pull through into that first table. Now, if you remember from that first example of the album list, we were looking for the information that's common between the two tables. So in this case, that information is the product information. So you can see I've got it here and I also have it just here. So I'm going to use the product information to pull through the department and the category, and we're going to use a VLOOKUP to do that. Now, with the VLOOKUP function, there are two types of lookup that you can get. So there's a VLOOKUP and there's an HLOOKUP. And what VLOOKUP stands for is vertical lookup, and HLOOKUP, as you can imagine, stands for horizontal lookup. And all that really relates to is the way that you have your data running down the page. Now, most of the time, I would say you're going to use VLOOKUP because your data runs vertically down the page. If I had these column headings, for example, running down in my rows, so maybe I had product, color, price, in stock running down here, then I would do an HLOOKUP because my data's running the other way. But I would say for the majority of cases, it's going to be a VLOOKUP that you're going to do. So let's get started with our VLOOKUP. Now, a couple of important points to mention here when you are about to do a VLOOKUP. I would always say it is best to sort your data first of all. So I've already sorted mine A to Z. So if you're not sure how to do a sort, I'm just clicking in my product column. And on the home ribbon, all the way across in this editing group, you have a sort A to Z or a sort Z to A. So I've sorted mine A to Z. You also have sort on the data ribbon as well if you prefer to go there. You have your sort A to Z and Z to A. So I've sorted mine. And we're going to use the VLOOKUP command to pull back the department information first of all. Now again, with any function in Excel, there are a couple of different ways that you can do it, and it really depends on personal preference. Now, I'm the type of person who will always like to type into the cell the command. But if you prefer to use something like the dialog box, then you can definitely do that from the formulas ribbon. So you'll see underneath here, you have all of your functions organized into libraries. So here you have a lookup and reference drop down, and this is where you'll find things like VLOOKUP, and you can see there it is at the bottom. So you can use that way if you want to. I'm going to show you both ways. So the first time I do it, I'm going to type it directly into the cell, and the second time I do it, I'm actually going to use what we call the functions dialog box. So let's start with our VLOOKUP. Now the first thing I would always say, whichever table you're using to look the information up in, so in this case it's this product catalog, to make your life a lot easier, I would always go in and name this range of data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in my data, I'm going to click anywhere, and I'm going to press Control A. Now that's a little shortcut key which is going to highlight all of your data around where you're clicked. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this range of cells, and you may have come across naming cell ranges previously. It's a very simple thing to do. All you need to do to name this range is to just go up to this little blank area just here. So where it currently says A7, where I'm hovering my mouse, you can see when I hover over it comes up with that little tag name box. And this is where you can give a meaningful name to the range of cells that you've selected, which essentially makes it a lot easier to reference that range in formulas. So I'm going to click in my name box, and I'm just going to call this catalog. Now, if you wanted to name it product catalog or something like that, one thing you have to remember when you're naming ranges is that you can't have a space in between words. It won't work. So it needs to be either all one word or separated by underscores. And always remember to press Enter just to set that name. So now essentially this range of cells has a name and it's called catalog. So I can now use that in my VLOOKUP, and it just makes my life a lot easier because I don't have to go in and select the cell range every single time. So I'm going to go back to here and I'm going to start to type in my formula. So I'm going to type in equals, and we're going to go VLOOKUP, open bracket. Now, as I said, this is the way that I prefer to do it. I'm going to show you how to do it using the dialog box. If you're learning, sometimes people find that a little bit easier. But you can see underneath, we now have this little helpful text underneath. So it says lookup value. That's highlighted in bold. So that's telling me that's what this formula requires next. So it's asking me what is the value, what is the lookup value? So essentially your lookup value is the piece of common information between those two tables. So if you remember, that piece of common information was the product. So I'm going to say A4. That's my lookup value. Comma. You can now see that table array is highlighted in bold. So it's saying, okay, where do you want me to look up this product? So I want to look up this product in that table that we just named. Now, if I hadn't named that table, what I would need to do would be to flip across to the next sheet, highlight that range of cells. Now, that's a little bit complicated and confusing. I don't like to do it that way, which is why I named the range, because that means that I can just type in the name of that range, and we called it catalog. So I can start to type catalog, and you can see it comes up underneath. I can double click. So that's where I'm looking up that product name, comma. Now it's asking me for the column index number. Now we're looking up the department, and I'm actually just going to come out of here for 1 second and just show you as we flip across to the product catalog. We're looking up the department just here. Now, the way that VLOOKUP works is it essentially numbers the columns from left to right. So the product column is 1, department is 2, category is 3. So when it's asking for the column number, because I want to pull back the department, I'm going to say it's column 2. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Let's go back and just type in all of that again. VLOOKUP. So our lookup value is the product, comma, we're looking it up in the catalog table or range of cells, comma, the column index number is 2 because we're pulling back that description, comma, and now it's asking us, do we want to do an approximate match or an exact match? And it's that true or false indicator on the end. Now I'm going to show you the difference between these two, but in this case we're going to do an exact match because what I want is for it to look up exactly that product name. Okay, so it's going to be false in this example because I want to do an exact match. Now I can type in false, or alternatively in Excel, if you remember, false equals 0 and true equals 1. So I could just type in a 0 on the end. It means exactly the same thing as false. So entirely up to you how you want to do that. And close my bracket. So that essentially is my whole VLOOKUP formula. And I hit enter and it pulls back that department. What I can then do is use my fill handle. So in the bottom corner, I can double click on my black cross and that will copy that formula all the way down and pull back that information like magic. Okay, so that is the basics of a VLOOKUP. We're going to do it one more time and I'm going to do it a slightly different way so you can see the alternative method. Now this time we're looking up the same information, so the same product. The only thing that's different here is we're pulling back the category instead. So let's just refer back to our catalogue. And you can see here the category is column 3. Remember, 1, 2, 3. So that's going to be the difference. And I'm going to do it a slightly different way. Instead of typing directly into the cell, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my functions dialog box. So I'm going to click on this little FX and I'm going to search for the VLOOKUP command. So I'm just going to type it in and click go. There it is. And when I double click, it pulls up this box. Now, as I said, some people find this easier to work with than directly typing into the cell. It's essentially the same if you look up the arguments that it requires. It's the same thing, but sometimes if you're learning, this is a slightly easier way of doing it. Now I'm going to pull this down here. So again, we're looking for our lookup value. So it's still going to be the product name. So I'm going to say A4. Table array. So we're still using catalog as our table. Now because we've named that range, if you can't remember what you've called your range, there is a quick way of pulling up all of the named ranges that you've got in your spreadsheet, and that is to press the F3 key. If you press that, it's going to bring up any named ranges that you have, and you can go in and you can select it. It's then asking for the column index number. So remember, we're pulling back the category, which was column 3. And then finally, we're looking for that true or false. And again, I'm doing an exact match, so I want a 0 in there for false. And click on OK. So that is pretty much exactly the same thing, but done in a very slightly different way. And I'm going to double click to copy that information down. All right, so hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an idea as to how that works. We're going to do it again with a different example. Let's jump across to our next spreadsheet. So this is another example, and this is a very simple table again where we have a part number, and I want to pull back the description of that part number and the unit price. And again, I have a little catalog over here which has my part number in column A, a description in column B, and the price in column C. So remember, we're numbering from left to right, so part number is column 1, description column 2, price column 3. So again, I'm going to come into here, I'm going to do Control A, and I'm going to name this range. So I'm going to click in my name box, and we're going to call this parts underscore catalog and hit enter. Going to go back to here and we're going to compose our VLOOKUP command. So we're going to say equals VLOOKUP, our lookup value. So again, what is that common piece of information between the two tables? And it is the part number, comma, table array. Where are we looking up that part number? We're looking it up in that parts catalog. So remember, you can press F3 and there is my parts catalog, comma. Which column are we pulling back? We're pulling back the description, which was column 2, comma, and we're doing an exact match. I want it to exactly match the part number in that table. So I can type false or 0 on the end and hit enter. And there we go. It pulls back the description and I can double click to copy that down. Now you might see in there we have an NA has come up. So it can't find essentially this part number in that parts catalog. So this part number is 12345, and if I jump across to the parts catalog, and I might just want to double check that by doing a find. So if I do Control F and search for 12345 and do find next, okay, so I know that it doesn't actually exist, which is why I'm getting that NA there. Now that's fine, but what I might want to do is add in a little bit of what we call error checking into there, just to make things a little bit tidier. Sometimes doesn't look too great to have lots of NAs or reference errors throughout your data, so we might want to fix that up a little bit. So this is a really useful little trick that you can apply to any formula that you use, not just VLOOKUP. You can wrap your formula with a little bit of error checking in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my VLOOKUP formula. I'm just going to click in the edit bar at the top and I'm going to add in if NA. Oops, like so. So it's basically saying if it finds an NA, what do you want me to do? Now I'm going to jump across right to the end of the formula and do comma. So now it's saying if it finds an NA, what do you want me to put in there? So maybe I just want it to be blank, maybe I want it to have a dash, or maybe I want it to say something like no part found. So if I just wanted it to be blank, I could put in 2 quote marks, which essentially will give me a blank, like so. All right, and if I enter and then copy this down, you'll see that the NA disappears. Now I might want to have something a little bit more meaningful in there, so I might want it to say no part found. So I could edit my formula, and in between the 2 quote marks I might want to say no part found, like so, and hit enter. And now when I copy down, that's a little bit neater. So you can add that if NA on the front and then just put what you want it to say on the end or after your formula, just to make it a little bit neater. So that's a little bit of error checking you can add in with any formula that you use. All right, let's do our VLOOKUP once again. So this time we're looking for the unit price. So let's just refer back to our catalog. So the unit price is column 3. And hopefully you're getting the idea of how we do this now. And let's do it to keep things consistent the other way using the dialog box. So again, our lookup value is the part number. Table array is where we're looking it up. So we're going to do an F3, parts catalog. The column index number this time is 3, and we're doing an exact match. So I'm going to say false or 0 in there and click on OK. And I can copy that down. And again, if I wanted to, I could add in that error checking at the top, if NA, and I'm going to say no part found again, like so. Okay, so a few different techniques in there. Hopefully that's starting to make a little bit of sense to you now. Now, in the examples that we've done so far, we've been very focused on that false argument. So each example that we've done our VLOOKUP and we've put that false argument on the end where we've been doing an exact match. So I just wanted to quickly show you an example of doing an approximate match, which is that the true argument on the end. So the kind of situations where you might use that. So what we have here is we have a little table at the top which has some income tax brackets. And you can see there's a low end and a high end. There's a range description, and then there is a marginal tax rate. And underneath I have a little table where we have some annual salaries, and what I want to do is I want to pull back what the tax rate is. So I want to look in this table for the salary, and I want it to pull back the marginal tax rate. Now, if we're using 55,000 as our first lookup point, if you look in the table, we don't have 55,000 exactly listed in here. It's within this range just here. So it's going to fall somewhere in the middle here. And that is why we use the approximate match, because we're not exactly matching 55,000. We're doing an approximate match. Okay, so that is where that true indicator comes in. So let's do our VLOOKUP. Actually, first of all, let's name our table. So I'm going to highlight my table. And this one I'm going to call income underscore tax. Hit enter. I'm going to come down here and we're going to say equals VLOOKUP. Our lookup value is the annual salary, so B12. Our table array, remember we can press F3, income tax, comma, our column index number. Now I'm pulling back the marginal tax rate. So 1, 2, 3, column 4 is what we want. Comma, and this time I'm not exactly matching 55,000, so I'm going to say true on the end and close. And there we go. And again, I can copy this down and we can do a quick visual check to make sure that this has worked okay. So 55,000 falls somewhere in between here, and we can see that yes, that is 25%. 8699 is up here, which is 10%, and then we have 90,000, which falls into this one here, which is 28%. So I just wanted to really highlight there the difference between those two, that false and that true argument on the end. Lovely. Hopefully you're all still with me. I can see things flashing, so I'm sure a lot of you have some questions. As I said, I can't take them as we go through, so please just kind of sit tight, hold on to them until the end of the session. All right, let's jump across to HLOOKUP. Now, I have nothing on this spreadsheet whatsoever, because what I want to do is also throw in another little tip for you. And that is when it comes to copying and pasting things as well. And this might be something you know, but I'm always surprised as to how many people don't actually know this. Now, as I said, HLOOKUP is a horizontal lookup. So far, everything we've done has been a vertical lookup. Our information is running vertically down the page. So let's have a look at how we might deal with it if our information is running horizontally across the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this parts catalog. So I'm going to Control A, the whole lot, and I'm going to copy it. So I'm going to do Control C, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it onto this spreadsheet just here, but I'm going to flip it around. And there is a little command underneath your paste option. So if I click the paste drop down and go to paste special, and as I said, you may have used this before, but this transpose option will essentially paste your data the opposite way round. So if I click on OK, you'll see what it's done here, and it's a bit confusing when you first look at it, but it's now got our column headings running down the side as opposed to across the top. So my information is running horizontally across the page as opposed to vertically. And this is where you would use an HLOOKUP if your data was running this way around. So again, how might we do that? So I'm going to do Control A to highlight all of this data. And this time I'm going to call it, I'm just going to call it horizontal, through lack of a better word. And I can still do my VLOOKUP. So if I was using this this VLOOKUP just here, if I delete out all of this, if I wanted to still look up this information, instead of using the VLOOKUP, I would use HLOOKUP, like so. Okay. Now the difference here is it's pretty much exactly the same. Instead, except of using column numbers, we're using row numbers. So let me just show you what I mean by that if we jump across to here. When before we were selecting a column number, we would now select a row number. So it's pretty much exactly the same. Part number is row 1, description is row 2, price is row 3. Okay, so let's see that in action. So we're going to say equals HLOOKUP, open bracket. Our lookup value is still that part number, comma. Our table array, well, we called it horizontal, so let's do an F3. And there it is, comma. Now this is the difference. It's now asking us for a row index number instead of a column index number. So our description was in row 2, I think it was. And we are doing an exact match of that part number, like so. And there we go. So it still works. It just depends which way you have your data running across the page. So that's the difference between VLOOKUP, approximate and exact match, so those true and false commands, and also HLOOKUP when your data is running across the page. And we've thrown in a few other things in there. So you've seen how to name ranges, you've seen how to add some error checking into your formulas, and you've also seen how to use that transpose paste command to switch your data around. And there's been a few little shortcuts in there as well. Is everyone okay so far? Are you all still with me? Yes, lovely. Thank you guys. Thank you. Wonderful. All right, let's move on. So we're going to jump into something a little bit more complicated now, and that is index and match. Now, if you've never used these before, these are two separate functions that can be used together, okay? So I like to use these for a more complex lookup. Now, there are some disadvantages with VLOOKUP. And if we go back to something like, let's say, like this. Now, with VLOOKUP, VLOOKUP can only look from left to right because it takes the column number. So it will always look up information going from left to right. So we were using the part number and then we were looking up information going this way. I couldn't, for example, use VLOOKUP to look up the price and then look backwards because it can only look up going left to right. That is the disadvantage with VLOOKUP. When you use index and match, you can basically look up information wherever it is in the table, okay, using whatever lookup value you like. And I will say that sometimes people do find this a little bit hard to get their head around. So I will say, when I show you this, you might think, oh my goodness, that is so complicated. I would advise you to kind of take this recording, go away and really just practice it, because once it clicks in your mind, it's not too bad. But the first time you see it, you're probably going to think, oh my goodness, what on earth is she doing? Now, what we're going to do here is we've got some apps in this little table just here. So we've got a division, which the app belongs to. We have the app name, so you might recognize some of those if you have apps on your phone. The amount of revenue those apps have generated, and also the amount of profit. And what I want to do over here is I want to be able to select an app from a little drop-down list, and I want to be able to pull back the division, profit and revenue. Okay, now the reason why I'm not using VLOOKUP for this is because if I select an app, now an app is located in this column just here. If I want to find the division, I'm looking from right to left. And remember, it can't go, VLOOKUP can't go from right to left. It always goes from left to right. So this is why I'm going to use an index and a match command instead. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to add a data validation list, and I think Yeah, it's already there. Bear with me. I was doing this earlier. I just need to delete out my data validation list so I can show you exactly how that is done. So just bear with me. I'm just going to delete out the one that I did earlier. All right. Now, data validation is also a really nice little utility in Excel. So what I want to be able to do is have a little drop-down arrow and be able to select any one of these apps. So I'm going to click in cell H5. I'm going to go up to my data ribbon. I'm going to go to data validation. And in this settings group, I'm looking for a list. And I then need to say, okay, what items do you want in your list? So I want to have all of the apps in a list. So I'm going to highlight my apps like so and click on OK. And you can now see I get a little arrow, which is going to allow me to go in and select any of the apps that I like. So that's a really great way of getting things into a nice little easy drop-down list. So what I essentially want to be able to achieve here is to click, select an app, and be able to pull back the division, profit, and revenue. And I'm going to combine the index and the match commands in order to do that. So let me just show you what they do separately and why they are more powerful together. So let's start with the division. I'm going to show you the index command on its own first of all. So I'm going to say equals index. Now, the first thing the index command wants is an array, and that's a bit of a confusing term sometimes. So the way I like to think about this is your first argument in your index function or index formula is always what you're looking up. So I'm looking up the division here. That's what I want to pull back. So I want to highlight all of that division column. That's my array, my selection of cells, comma. Now it's saying row number. Now I'm looking for the app Google Docs because that's what I've got selected up here. Now if I look at my apps and count down how many rows till I find Google Docs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I could say, okay, pull back row number 6 and close my bracket. And that's going to give me the division, which is productivity, which is correct. Now that's all well and good, but do I really want to have to count down every time I want to do this formula? Not really. Imagine if you had hundreds and hundreds of rows and you're spending your time counting down so you can pull back the correct value. That's not particularly very efficient. So what we want to do is we want to find a way to automate the finding of this row number, and that is where the match command comes in. So let's do the match command on its own so you can see how that works, and then we'll combine the two together. So if I was just using match, I could say equals match. Now match wants to know what my lookup value is. So my lookup value is essentially going to be whatever is in this cell just here, comma. Lookup array. So where am I looking up that particular item? Well, it's an app, so I'm looking up in the apps column, comma. And do I want to do an exact match? Yes, I do. So I'm going to say 0. And it tells me that Google Docs is located in row 6. So that command or that formula essentially automates the finding of the row, which is why we can combine index and match together to get our desired result essentially. So let's do that. As I said, I know the first time you see this, it's a bit like, ooh, all over the place. So equals, oops, index. Remember, with the index, the first thing you want is the array or the range of cells where you're, the item that you're looking up. So in this case, the division, we're going to highlight that range, comma. So it now wants the row number. Now before, we gave it the row number. We gave it the row number of 6, but this time, we're just going to add in our match command, because remember, match will automate the finding of that row number. So now with match, our lookup value is whatever is in here. And remember, that can change because we've got it on a data validation drop down, comma. Lookup array, where are we looking for this app? We're looking for it in this apps list, comma, and I want it to exactly match the name of the app, which is 0. Now, I need to close off with 2 parentheses or 2 brackets. Remember, you must always close off as many parentheses as you open. So I've opened 2 in this formula, so I'm closing off 2 at the end. And hit enter. And there we go. Google Docs is in the productivity group, and if I was to change this via the drop down, you can see now everything updates nicely. Okay, let's do it again because practice makes perfect. So this time we're looking up the profit. So I'm going to do equals, index. Now this time we're looking up the profit. So we want to highlight the profit array, comma. We want to find the row number. So this is where we do our match. Our lookup value is the app, so H5, comma. We're looking up the app in the apps list, comma, and we're doing an exact match. Close off 2 brackets. Pretty much exactly the same as the first example. The only difference is we're looking for the profit as opposed to the division in this example. And there we go. And again, everything, if you've done it correctly, should update correctly. All right, let's do it one more time because, you know, with these, practice makes perfect. So this time we're looking up the revenue. So we want to highlight the revenue array, comma, match. Our lookup value is H5, comma. Our lookup array, we're still looking in our apps group, or apps range, I should say, comma. Oops. And we're doing an exact match. Close off our brackets and enter. And there we go. So that is index and match. I know that is so quick, but I want to make sure that we do get through a lot of the content that I have. So as I said, watch this video back and really just kind of recreate my example, have a little play around with it yourself. As I said, index and match together are a really powerful way of being able to do lookups. So hopefully everybody is okay with that. We've gone through such a lot so far. So all of the VLOOKUPs, HLOOKUPs, index and match. Wonderful commands to have in your toolkit, I should say. Right, let's move on. Now, I just want to jump back to my slides very briefly because we're going to move on to taking a look at if statements. And again, this is another really, really important function, I should say, in Excel. And we're not going to go into them in too much depth today. I'm just going to show you the basics of how you construct them and explain to you what exactly they can do. And as always, you could use the filtered course, which you have access to learn more about them, or you've always got Google and YouTube and things like that. But again, very, very useful. So, what is an if statement? Well, an if statement will return one value if the condition is true, or another value if the condition is false. And I've just put the syntax underneath there of the command. So if statements will always start with a logical test, and then it will ask you, what do you want me to do if that test is true? What do you want me to do if that test is false? So an example I would give underneath would be, say that it says if the value of a cell in A2 is over 80%, then return the word pass. If it's not, then return the word fail. So that might be some exam questions or something like that. So let's take that example and just illustrate it a little bit more in a demonstration so you can fully understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's just say we have some students just here. These are their exam scores, and I want to say whether they've passed or failed. So I might say that the pass mark is maybe 82%. So what I could say is equals, and I could type in if, and it wants the logical test. So I could say if B4 is greater than or equal to 82%, that's my logical test. So it's saying if B4 If that's greater than or equal to 82%, comma, now it's saying, what do you want me to do if that is true? Now, if that is true, I want you to put in the text pass, comma. If it's false, I want you to put in the text fail. Okay, so we have our logical test, which is this part here. We have our value if it's true, and our value if it's false. And hit enter like so. Okay, and then you can copy that down. All right, so that's sort of the basics of how an if statement works. You have a logical test, what you want Excel to do if that's true, what you want it to do if it's false. Okay, so let's see that in a little bit more action. So again, we have some data here, and this is just employee information. So we have some employee names, we have the building that they work in, the department, the date they were hired, the years that they've worked there, the benefits, salary, and they have a job rating. And it's this column that's important to me in this particular scenario. So what we're going to say is that anybody who has a job rating of 5 is going to get a £3,500 bonus. Lucky them. If they've got a job rating of 4, it's 3,000, job rating of 3, 1,500, so on and so forth. So I want to use an if statement in order to pull back that information. And again, with this, there are a few different ways that you can do it. So I'm just going to widen this column out very slightly because this is quite long. I'm going to type in equals if, open bracket. Now our logical test. Now in this case, we're testing what the job rating is. So what I'm saying here is if H2 is equal to 5, comma, so if that's true, they're going to get, let's say, 3,500. Now, because I have it down here in a table, I can just select the cell. You could type in or hard code in 3,500 if you wanted to. Now, I'm going to then do comma, and if that's false, maybe they're going to get nothing. Okay, so you can see there, they're going to get nothing. Oh, I know what I did wrong there. Sorry, I need to make this absolute because we're dragging down. So just bear with me. Let me just make that absolute and then drag down, and you should see the difference there. There we go. Okay. So again, because I utilized information over here, when I dragged it down, it was dragging down here, which is why we got the wrong figure in the first instance. So again, if I was to hard code this in, then it would work fine. But if you're using it in a table, remember to make your cell references absolute. Now you could kind of move this on another level. Let me just delete that out. And you could say equals if logical test, if H2 is equal to 5, comma, I'm just going to type these in for argument's sake. So we're going to say 3,500, comma, and what I could then do is add another if statement in there. So again, I could say if H2 is equal to 4, then 3,000, comma, and I could carry on going, and this is what we call nested if statements. Okay, so I'm just putting in all of my logical tests, and I'll just do the first 3, comma, and then we're going to say 1,500. And I could carry on going if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. All right, and then comma, for anything else, I might say that they're going to get 0, like so. Oh. like so, and then we can drag down. So for the first few, you should see that those have input in correctly, okay, and anything else has a 0. Now that error I got was because I hadn't put enough parentheses on the end. So with Excel, it is quite useful. If you forget how many parentheses you need to put on the end, it will prompt you with an error and say, would you like me to correct it? Which is what it did in this case. So you can go through adding in all your different if statements just to build that up. Now, there are so many different ways that you can use ifs, and we just don't have enough time to go through them all in this session today. There is also a new command called ifs, so IFS, which kind of enables you to do nested if statements like we've done here, but a lot more efficiently, so it doesn't end up being such a long formula. And the ifs function is available in Excel 2016 and upwards. So if you have 2016 or 2019, you will have access to that function. I don't think you have it in 2013 or below, so just remember that. Now, as I said, that is just a very, very simple if statement that you can do. I would advise you to have a little play around with those. I will give you one more example because it is slightly different. It's when you can use if to when you're using text. So again, here we have a little shopping list and we have some items. We have the delivery status, and I want to find out if there's going to be action required. So every time the word delivered is there, there's going to be no action required. So I'm going to say equals if. So what's our logical test? Well, if B4 equals delivered, if that's true, then we're going to say no action. If it's false, we're going to say action, like so. All right, so logical test, value if true, value if false. And there we go. And double click to copy down. All right, so you can use it with text as well as numbers. All right, now it looks like we're overrunning. I think I thought this was until 1:30, but maybe I got that a little bit wrong. Maybe it was 1:15. There is a little bit more I'd love to show you, but as usual, we are out of time, so I'll make a note of those things, and maybe we can do those in the next webinar. So what I'll do now is I'll just very quickly open it up to questions if anybody has any. I know we have overrun very slightly, but if you have a question you'd like to type it in, I can take a couple. Oh, thank you, Judith. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Oh, wonderful. Everyone's saying that they're all good. Everybody wants to go get their lunch. Robin's put, how do you make cells absolute and why? Okay, so with cell ranges, so let me go back to, let's say, what should we do here? Yeah, so to make a cell absolute, you press the F4 key on your keyboard, which will essentially put $ in front of your cells. What it does is it locks that cell. So when you're doing things like copying formulas down, so if you have a formula and you want to copy it down, Excel will always move down a row to enable you to copy down. If you want to always refer to a specific cell, you must make sure that you lock it to that cell so that even when you copy down, the cell will stay locked in the formula, and that is why you would use an absolute referencing. Lovely. Sorry, these questions are going through so fast. Everyone's saying all good, all good. If you use if NA, will it affect the total if there's text? No, it won't. No, it won't. No. Let's see. Everyone's just saying great webinar, great webinar. Okay, Lindy's got quite a long one there. Oh, it's scrolling up. Let's have a look. In the future, can you cover off the HLOOKUP formula? Oh, Mark, that's exciting. Yeah, I know HLOOKUP is a new function that's been introduced very recently, and that might be a good one to do a webinar on or include in a future webinar. Very good suggestion. Right, okay, there are a couple of things coming through, but I am very aware of the time. So what I'm going to do is most people are just saying thank you very much. As Jamie said, this will be sent through to you, the video recording. And I am happy for you to send me any questions if you want. Maybe Jamie can forward them on to me. That would be brilliant. But I will hand back to him for now and let you all get on with your lunch.